Okay, so good evening and welcome to our fifth National Online Broadview Reading Club. My name is Jocelyn Bell and I'm the editor and publisher of Broadview. And with me working in the behind the scenes is Sharon Doran, who is our promotions manager. And we're so very grateful that you've taken an hour of your evening to spend it with us and to talk about the important issues that are in front of us. Because there are quite a few of us tonight, please make sure that you've muted your audio, and I may mute it for you if you haven't done that. But do turn on the chat function. And the chat function, if you hover to the bottom of your screen, there's a little speech bubble. If you click on that, then you'll be able to see the chat. We would love to know where you're from. So if you'd like to take a minute and just type into the chat your name, what your hometown is, and if you're a member of a community of faith and you'd like to share that with us as well, that would be lovely. I'd like to get to know everybody who's here tonight. This evening we have with us two writers from our October issue, Mike Alexander and Josiah Neufeld, as well as one interviewee, which is Nora Sanders, who was interviewed by Mike Milne. And all three have graciously offered their time to be with us for this event. So if you're new to this event, how it goes is I will introduce each of them in turn, and each person will have about 5 minutes to speak, and then we'll have about 10 or 11 minutes to ask them questions or make comments before we move on to the next person. Please, I beg you, be brave and ask questions. In our post-reading club surveys, we've been told several times by many people that they don't want to just hear from me asking questions, although I have got lots of questions to fill in the space, but just want to hear from me, they want to hear from each other. And so please be brave and know that you've got the cheering of the entire group behind you to ask your questions and make comments. There are two ways to ask questions, and it's just really entirely up to your own comfort level. You can either type your question into the chat space and I will read it for you. Or better yet, if you just want to type, I have a question, and then I will call on you and just say over to you, Sharon or whomever, and you can ask your question. So is that clear? Everybody can give me thumbs up if that makes sense. And we'll continue on. I've got a couple people to admit here. Great. So let's get started. We are going to begin tonight with Mike Alexander. Mike is an Anishinaabe artist, writer, and triathlete. He is originally from Swan Lake First Nation, but now lives in Kamloops, BC. Mike is becoming a regular contributor to Broadview, and tonight is actually his second appearance at the Broadview Online Reading Club. In our October issue, he wrote a column entitled Why Statues Should Fall, addressing the controversial issue of what to do with Canada's monuments to its historic white leaders. So I will turn the floor over to you, Mike.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Jocelyn, and to the staff at Broadview. A few of you I am getting to know by name, and it's kind of cool to keep on being asked to offer my little opinions about some pretty important subject matter. And certainly the issue of statues in Canada is pretty controversial as far as I can tell. And sometimes I sort of feel like the stuff that I write about or think about are pretty straightforward, issues pertaining to, the United Nations General Assembly and their sort of definition of what qualifies as genocide. I don't think that there's an awful lot of debate about what genocide is according to the UN, or if there is debate about that, the UN can sort of clarify those concerns. What I think is harder sometimes to understand is how people like myself and anyone else sort of tuning in today perceive an issue. And I know that this issue of statues is a pretty loaded pretty loaded issue, just because I think people seem to really enjoy monuments. People enjoy being reminded of the culture that they are a part of. And, certainly I feel like I have been walking in a culture where I see, Canada's founding fathers kind of, you know, made to be these important sort of figures, part of what shaped the country. And so writing about that, I don't know. There's several people have written about it as well. One of my heroes, John Cleese, waded in. Monty Python is one of my favorite comedies. And, when John sort of said that he was concerned about, statues coming down as a way to sort of erase history, that he didn't approve of it, that stung a little bit, which is fair. John is entitled to his opinion, and closer to home, Justice Murray Sinclair, a few years ago, said that his concern about tearing down statues was that it might be perceived as an act of revenge coming from an angry place, people wanting to sort of vandalize and destroy, property, that sort of thing. So it's not as though, people that I sort of, whose opinions I value, aren't saying things that I think some readers of Broadview aren't also sort of concerned about. The fact that maybe there are better things to do with statues. I think about things like, I feel like I've read about things where people suggest putting them into museums, where they can be appreciated there, or, where plaques can be sort of placed next to statues that sort of illustrate the negative histories of people like Johnny MacDonald and all the gang, so to speak. But there's something about the idea that, the desire to take them down is by virtue a vengeful act or an angry act, and I think that, I feel like the idea that it has to be either or doesn't quite, sit well with me. I think it's actually a way to sort of acknowledge harm that's occurred. I think it by removing negative sort of institutions, negative, like the actually removing residential schools from the equation. I think that we still remember that happened, that the residential school experience happened, even if, we shut those down, and in most cases burned those buildings to the ground. If you look at Germany, I don't think that there's any, monuments to the Nazi Third Reich that stand, and people seem to be able to understand, what role that the Third Reich played in history. So, but one of the things I do sort of value from, Murray Sinclair in particular, is the fact that he did sort of talk about, well, who are the Indigenous people that we do want to honor? Who are people that could be counter to people like Ryerson and MacDonald? I think about people my own age. I think about people like Wanique Horn Miller, the Olympian, polo player, who survived being bayoneted by a member of the Canadian military at Oka. That's a really important person that I really aspire to, and that I think, Canadians could really identify with if they knew a little bit more about her. So I don't want to sort of forget about the fact that there are things that can be done once, statues have been removed, that can sort of help paint a little bit of a better picture of what to do about Canadian history and how to present it in a way that doesn't make people sort of fear, I guess, at these gigantic statues leering down at them, reminding them of what happened to their families.
Thanks, Mike. This is a lot of important thoughts. I don't see any questions yet, so I'll ask my burning question. Well, it's not a question, it's just, we've received a number of letters from your column, and some of them are supportive. The ones that are more critical, the kind of the theme that I think runs through them is to stay, you know, MacDonald, Laurier, McGill, Ryerson, those guys, they weren't racist by the standards of their time. So is it fair to judge them by what we consider to be racism today? And are we being unfair? And so I just wonder I hear that a lot, and I wonder what your answer is to that line of thinking. And then I see we have another question coming up.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, who cares what I think? You know, I'm just a guy here in Kamloops doing my thing. I don't have, you know, universities named after me. You know, I don't have the kind of power, this kind of staying power that these people have. You know, and I think that there's an awful lot of attention given to these folks that, right or wrong, they get. So their staying power is considerably much more than anything that I could say in opposition to, you know, the lives they lived and the legacies that they left behind. You know, for the most part, Canada doesn't seem to have a problem with the legacy that they have. And, you know, I'm just a guy with my own take on this. So if people were interested in sort of hearing, you know, a different perspective on that history, for sure, you know, it's there. But I think it's a little bit more convenient or accessible to just sort of like, you know, have Canada Day and celebrate with this history that sort of completely blankets out any other sort of perspective. So that's kind of where that's at. I don't quite see how I've got it sort of way too slanted in one direction than the other.
Michael has a question. Go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Mike, for the piece and the discussion. It seems that there's sort of a retrospective aspect to this of what we do about things commemorating these past evils, but then there's also, I suppose, as you've mentioned here, a prospective element of how do we change this kind of going forward and commemorating things that are happening now and that are happening in the future, and trying to do that in a more thoughtful way. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about some sort of process of adjudicating that and trying to see that future monuments and statues like this are commemorating things that sort of we as a collective society feel better about, so that we're not creating these problems in the future.
Yeah, I don't specifically know what that process looks like. I hear what you're saying as far as the need to look forward. You know, I think that one of the things that I really sort of struggle with, that my mom has, you know, tried to get me to understand since I was a kid, was all I ever do is focus on the past. Like, can't we move forward and can't we do something good moving ahead? And I get that. Like, I think it's important to do that. And for sure, I think that part of the piece was sort of, again, like, I feel like I'm constantly reminding folks of this thing that, you know, happened. And I'm not happy to stay in the past either. You know, I don't want to keep doing this. I feel like I've been writing in some way the same article for, what, decades now? Yeesh, I'm getting old. But I think it is, you know, what is the process to get more people to sort of understand where we're going? And I think that some of the curriculum that we're looking at now being introduced at all levels of education are going to bring out, you know, more leadership. You know, I just came from a high school doing art workshops with some Native kids here in town. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to see these folks who are engaged, who are doing it, who are doing the work, who have a really solid understanding with themselves, with their peers, with their communities, And these are the folks that I think are going to be making the decisions about, who do we embrace as leadership that we want Canadians to know about. I can, probably generate a pretty short list pretty quickly that reflects, my generation. Wanique was the main example that I could think of. But there's other folks I think that are worth taking a look at. And, I don't know specifically what the youth are up to by way of organizing themselves at that level that I think you might be sort of thinking about. But politically, it's happening, and that's a really good thing. I think, being a 46-year-old guy, feel like I'm seeing this next generation coming up with the answers that we're all looking for here. So if I could sort of do anything to pave the way for them, that's kind of what I want to do. And if I have any guidance, hopefully it's valuable to them.
We have, I've got a message from Mary Leslie who wants to share something with you. Go ahead, Mary.
Yes, Mike, after I read your article, I was attending a Zoom down all with Elizabeth May, and I typed my question, what was her view on these statues and should they be removed? And she had quoted me, and I'm sure I'm not getting it verbatim, from a discussion she had with Cindy Blackstock, is they shouldn't be destroyed. They needed to be moved to a place where the full story could be recorded. I think one had been removed into the Museum of Man, is it, in Ottawa? There's a big cultural museum. I haven't been to Ottawa.
I think.
Pardon me?
Museum of Civilization?
Yeah, that's it. And a statue had been moved there where they could put the whole story. And as far as her concern, Cindy's concern was, we need to know who these people were. They're in our history books, and we need to know the full text of what they've done. And out in the public where there's not room for that text and that explanation, they do more harm than they would in a museum where we can flesh it out. Just a thought.
Yeah, I like it. I'm, sort of was hinting at it, but I'm of two minds a lot of the time. If I've had a pretty rough day at the office, so to speak, and I'm not feeling it, or if I've read something really awful in the news, yeah, I'm feeling pretty upset, and I'd like to see statues dragged off the nearest mountain and just kicked off, and that's the end of it. On days where I feel a little bit, more reconciliatory, I feel like there are ideas that can be communicated through plaques in a pretty structured environment that provides a reasonable context for articulating, the suffering that these figures have caused throughout history, right? So today I'm feeling pretty good about, pretty hopeful about the future. So, I think that, Cindy is for sure one of the leaders of our time. And I think that, her and Murray Sinclair and folks like that, definitely, these are where we're going to be, having to come up with solutions from, I think, as well. These are folks that have lived that history a lot more than I have, and their reflections are quite valuable to me as well.
Thank you so much, Mike. That's very thoughtful, and I'm glad you're feeling good today. We want you to feel good today, and this conversations are so important, and to hear from all sides, but to consider. I don't think you're just a guy with an opinion. I think you're, somebody whose opinion I respect a lot, and I'm happy to amplify it in my way. So, yeah, I hope you continue to have opinions about lots of things and on many, many topics. So with that, we're going to move along to Josiah. Josiah Neufeld is a magazine journalist and fiction writer from Winnipeg. He grew up in Burkina Faso, and later when he moved back to Canada, he worked as a newspaper reporter in Winnipeg and earned a Master's of Fine Arts degree in creative writing at the University of British Columbia. Since last October, Josiah has been writing a monthly column for Broadview called Creation in Crisis, in which he explores religious beliefs and spiritual practices, or how religious beliefs and spiritual practices shape the work of climate activists. His column wraps up this month with his interview with Cheryl Bradby. So we'll talk about this month's column, but also what he's learned over the course of a year of delving into this subject. So Josiah, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I just prepared a few remarks about how the column came to be in general, and then if people have specific questions about any of the, or about how the column series came to be, and then if people have specific questions about specific columns, they can ask them. So thank you again for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. I pitched this column series on the topic of the climate crisis and spirituality to Broadview about a year and a half ago in the spring of 2019. And in many ways, 2019 felt like it was a year when the world woke up to just how dire the climate emergency was. There was Greta Thunberg, and there were a couple of big studies that came out about the rate of global heating and the massive species loss that we were facing. And yeah, it felt like a lot of people began to acknowledge that we're on the brink of a pretty critical crisis, maybe the most critical one humanity's ever faced. And I started to think about this moment as a turning point. We have a couple of paths before us, and it's a turning point. And I was thinking of it as a turning point, not just for our economic and social and political structures, which all need to change very quickly if we're going to survive, but also for our spirituality as well. And some of you may be familiar with the late religious historian Phyllis Tickle, who wrote about a phenomenon that others have observed as well within Christianity. She observed that every 500 years or so, Christianity undergoes a major renovation, a yard sale, I think she called it, where we throw out centuries of accumulated tradition and structure and reinvent the faith, focusing on what's essential. So 500 years ago, we had the Protestant Reformation, and 500 years before that was the split between Eastern and Western traditions. So, by her calculations, we're due for another major reinvention. And I think all religions and spiritual traditions undergo these historic transformations and moments of change. And I think humanity as a whole is in the midst of this massive moment of change. So in trying to think about this moment and how to write about it, I was looking at different examples of how our spirituality is changing. And one interesting example I found is the wild church movement, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a movement of congregations from many different denominations, including the United Church of Canada, who gather outdoors. They don't have buildings. That's kind of the main feature of this movement. And they meet outside, in part because they believe that Christianity somewhere along the way lost its communion with the natural world. Most religious traditions can be traced back to a time when their most sacred rituals occurred outside on hilltops or next to standing stones or under sacred groves. And in the 1990s, there was an American Catholic priest and eco-theologian, Thomas Berry, who was writing about this, and he urged Christians to put their Bibles on the shelf for a while and go outside and learn to listen to the revelation of the universe. So I wanted to explore this shift a little bit more, and I pitched a column series to Broadview that would, with the idea that each month I would interview someone, a priest or a theologian or a pastor or an activist or a scientist, someone who is doing work on the climate emergency, and I talked to them specifically about how their spirituality came to bear on their work and how it informed them, and how their work in climate research or climate activism informed their spirituality. So I ended up talking to some really fascinating people. There were, I think I did 11 columns in all. Among them were Laurel Dykstra, who's an Anglican priest who leads a wild church congregation in Vancouver. And they sometimes, on Good Friday, they'll observe the Stations of the Cross on sites where people have inflicted devastation on the natural world. For instance, a a debris-choked salmon stream near Burnaby Mountain, where there were huge uprisings against the construction of Trans Mountain Pipeline. And in fact, Laurel and one of their parishioners were arrested for standing in the way of that pipeline. I spoke to Diana Beresford Kruger, who's an Irish-Canadian botanist, and her study, excuse me, her study of boreal forests and her scientific work is informed by her childhood in Ireland, where she learned about the medicinal and spiritual qualities of plants and ancient indigenous wisdom.
Josiah, is there one, sorry to interject, is there one particular interview that really has stayed with you, or a quote that's, you're somebody who's out, we all are, but you've spent a lot of time thinking about climate crisis and the spiritual response and how we need, what kind of spirituality is called for at this time. And I wonder if there's one or even two, like who really helped you with your thinking on that topic?
Yeah, there was such a range, they were all so different in their own way that that it's hard to, I'm trying to think if there was a specific one. I mean, Diana Beresford Kruger really sort of married the scientific and the spiritual in a way that was really interesting. Yeah, because she's a scientist, but she's also someone who believes in spirituality and trees and kind of the way they heal us, and she was really fascinating to talk to. Willie James Jennings is an African-American theologian who writes about how we design cities and how they're still designed to sequester Black people and people of color in certain neighborhoods, and how that's connected to a theology of colonialism and domination that has contributed to destruction of the natural world in some ways. So yeah, it's hard to pick a single one, because I feel like they all informed me in different and really interesting ways. Yeah.
I understand that you're going to write a book coming up about this topic. Is that correct? Or you're starting to work on it?
Yes, I would like to. That's my goal. I've been gathering research for the past, I guess, almost 2 years, and I'm right now I'm creating a book proposal and some sample chapters and pitching it around to different editors and agents to see if I can find someone who's interested in giving me a little bit of money to work on it.
Yeah. One of the things you talked about with Cheryl Bradby was, well, you quoted her saying, an ark is any vehicle metaphorically that transports you or other species through climate chaos. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm wondering what metaphorical arcs are helping to transport you through this. Where do you find your hope?
Yeah, I find energy in people who are doing work. There's so many people who are doing work. It's easy to feel despair when I think about everything that's been lost, and big companies like Exxon who are planning to burn so much more fossil fuels, but I find energy and hope in just working with people. I do activism here in Winnipeg with my community, with people who are passionate about our forests and our waterways and indigenous land, and yeah, that's when I need a bit of hope, then I get to work with people who are doing really good stuff in my neighborhood, in my community. Yeah.
I don't see any questions yet, so I'll just keep going, but please, as I reminded you before, jump in and ask your questions. We really would love to hear them. We think about the Christian worldview on the climate crisis, and in some ways that's probably hindered our ability to grapple with it. I mean, there's some Christians who think divine intervention is going to save us, so we don't really need to do much, or have a different understanding of our role in the universe that might not be helpful. But what's your sense of Christianity, and whether it's helping or hindering progress on the climate crisis?
Yeah, I think it's doing both. I think just religion can be religion is doing so many things, and Christianity has so many facets and so many aspects. I've just been reading about this book here, The Gospel of Climate Skepticism, why certain evangelicals have, denying climate change has become so fundamental to their identity, how that came about, and who shaped that narrative. And there's a lot of power in that narrative that's being used in devastating ways. And at the other end of the spectrum, there's people who are so, I talked to these Catholic worker activists who shut off a pipeline in Wisconsin and got taken away by the police, and they're just so passionate about calling on their rituals and the saints, and their whole long tradition leads them to this intervention to fight for what's sacred for them. So I can't say it's one or the other. I mean, there's both sides, and I'm curious about how it sometimes it does. Sometimes it seems like a lot of different faiths rather than one large faith, because
That's fair.
these people do different things.
Rob Metcalf would like to make a comment. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, while you were talking, I was just thinking about experience of church camps, which bring young people into nature and in a setting of worship, and that this does bring that together. And in my mind, I was thinking there's something that I read in Broadview that talked about nature and Christianity being forced apart. And I realized it was in the graphic novel of the young people sitting around the campfire and reflecting. And so it's just a comment on what I think of what you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. That comic was drawn by a good friend of mine, Jonathan Dick. He's a wonderful artist, and I know what you're talking about. That was a poignant moment in that comic strip. I'm glad Broadview published it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that, your goal that you set out when you pitched this column, we talked a little bit about that, but I'm going to quote you back to you. You said, "My goal is to learn what kind of spirituality might be called for in this moment, to spur us to action, to help us overcome our divisions, and to prepare us for the sacrifices we must make." Lofty goals. Which, if all, perhaps, do you feel, or which of those goals do you really feel like you accomplished in your year?
I didn't find, the one spiritual tradition or path that's going to be the solution to all our problems, because of course, I don't think there is one spiritual tradition or path. I think it's a matter of all of us working together. But I was confirmed in my belief that this is a spiritual question and a spiritual undertaking, and it can't be done without the Spirit. And when I talk to the Indigenous activists who are so deeply connected to their land on a spiritual level, and Catholic workers who are so motivated by a tradition and a spirituality of justice that goes so much deeper than just a practical, let's get something done. It goes to the core of who they are. It can't be done without a spiritual. The work that we have before us has to involve us reaching down and connecting with our spirits and connecting with each other on that level. So I don't know.
Seems to me a lot of people are still missing that. It's it's always approached as a science question, a technology question, and maybe a political question. But, you know, what are they missing when they ignore the spiritual dimension of this crisis?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's true that I spend a lot of time with activists talking about practical considerations who don't necessarily get into the matter of spirituality, and I think that is a loss. Sorry, what was your question? What do we miss?
Well, yeah, I guess you know, if people, what do we miss if we don't take into account the spiritual dimension of, you know, the solution has to involve spirit, I guess is what I think. So I'm wondering what you think.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think it has to involve a complete transformation of our society and how we care for each other. And you know, it's a matter of justice. It's not just a matter of counting emissions. It's a matter of paying attention to the people who are the most vulnerable and the people for whom the system isn't working and hasn't been working for a long time. And you know, that's spiritual work. There's lots of people who've been doing that work for centuries.
Well, speaking of doing spiritual work for not centuries, but over about 13 years, we're going to segue now to Nora Sanders. Nora Sanders grew up in the United Church, and she trained as a lawyer, worked for the government, and then became the United Church's General Secretary in 2007. This fall, she's going to retire after 13 years as the denomination's administrative leader. She was interviewed by Mike Milne in our October issue, and we are very pleased to welcome Nora tonight. So go ahead, Nora.
Thanks very much, Jocelyn, and great to be here. It's kind of an honor to be on a panel or a part of the evening with Mike and with Josiah. Like any one of these threads of conversation, we could have such a great evening just on any one thing. And what I thought I'd like to talk a bit about tonight is change, and things that are unchanging, things that are changing. And you guys have both kind of offered examples of that. And I think the first thing I wanted to say about change is that there are certain things that don't change. Like I think the basic values and principles from our scriptures, especially those stories of Jesus, they're kind of timeless, but we have to figure out how to apply them in each time and place. Like I heard the comment about Phyllis Tickle and so on, and it just makes sense that we're living in a different time, and so what do these teachings mean for people of our time? And I was going to say too that so many times, and I think especially in the last few months in the pandemic time when things were so uncertain, I found when we first did the big shutdown and everybody was scrambling to think, what's this mean? Just those lines from our creed, God is with us, we are not alone, I think are so important because it isn't about any one of us. We're all together, and there's somebody greater than us, however we in our own belief define God. We define God in many, many ways, because as our Song of Faith begins, God is holy mystery. So none of us will ever truly get it. But I think change is one of the constants, which sounds trite to say, but it's so true. And I actually think that's a good thing. And I wanted to talk about it because during my time as General Secretary, we've seen lots of changes in the church structure. I see Vic Weeb here. He was a big part of the comprehensive review work. And those things are trivial in the long run, in the sense of what church structure got to do with the needs of the world and so on. But I think the principle behind it was getting simpler, trying to spend less time on governance stuff so that people could spend more time on their own faith, their own spirituality, and what they want to do about it, and as to how they live. And I think, when I say change is a good thing, I guess I just invite everybody to think of those examples from their own life. Some of the things that as you look back, you're so glad happened, involved huge change. And for me, I'll just give a couple of examples, but one was as a young lawyer when I decided to, I thought for 2 years, leave my hometown practice and go up and work for the government of the Northwest Territories in their legal department, a whole new world opened up for me, an understanding, or a beginning of understanding, which continues, of Indigenous traditions and different ways of living, just exposure to so many different ideas and challenges by living in a new place and so on. Many things that led to, one thing leads to another, but I'm just saying that sort of a change, when I embarked on it, I couldn't have imagined where it would take me. And I think the changes that we're in the midst of now, we can't imagine where they'll take us. And for me, another example was, since I've been General Secretary, so I think I'm probably the only General Secretary that's had parental leave while on General Secretary, while serving in that role. When I adopted my son 9.5 years ago, and Vic can recall from our time working together, that wasn't always a smooth path. But you know, it's been a wonderful, wonderful blessing in my life, and I think that's the way with some of the greatest blessings, that they're not necessarily a smooth path, but they call us to go deeper into relationship, and to change ourselves. And I think what I wanted to think about is that United Church, we want to think of ourselves as the most inclusive, the most, and in many ways, it depends what you're comparing us to, but compared to other churches, maybe we are, it's good. But I also am so aware that many people over the years have not felt welcome, have not even felt maybe comfortable to come into a United Church. We're finding out in these COVID times that some people are connecting online because you can just kind of check it out. You can watch a service, you can hear the words said and find out if you connect with it, rather than feeling like you have to go into a building, you're not sure where to sit and what the protocols will be, and maybe it's too formal and all that kind of thing. So change involves not just welcoming others in, but being willing to be different because they're there. And I think for us as a church, as for any part of society, it's so important. We need to, I just pray that our church will be open enough to change to meet the needs of younger people, change to meet the needs of Indigenous people that bring different traditions, change to meet the needs of people from other parts of the world with the different traditions that they bring. And I think for the church, as far as how we practice our faith, I'm hoping we can understand like a greater variety of ways of doing that. I love the reference to the wild church, and I know people that are keen on that. And as a child, one of my, in fact, for much of my life, I've looked back on childhood time when we were at somebody's cottage, and there was a weekly worship service outdoors on an island. And to me, that was always how I imagined the best kind of church. And I think another experience that made me not afraid of doing things differently was during the time when I lived in Iqaluit, and there's no United Church in Iqaluit, so I attended the Anglican Church, and that was good. Its roots are sort of as a missionary church, so the theology was fairly, I would say, a little bit narrow, but on the other hand, I had some wonderful fellowship and friendships there, and good time worshiping there. But I kept running into people around town that I knew were United Church, and we always said, let's, we should get a little group going. And eventually we did get a little group going, and it turned out to be, for me, and I think for most of the others in that group, one of our deepest faith experiences. And it wouldn't have happened if we'd had a congregation there. Nothing against congregations. I love being part of a congregation, but we just had to sit down and figure it out. And what we did was take a piece of scripture and have a little service, but then after that, we talked about it. What does that mean for how we're living in this community right now, and the challenges we're facing and the needs we're meeting? And in fact, it used to be if somebody went down south to Ottawa or something, and they might go to church when they were there, and they'd come back and say, well, it was so great to be part of a congregation. They had a choir and all that. And then usually somebody would say, but when do they talk about this stuff? And that was, so I was really shaped by that experience, and it's made me less afraid of church looking different, which has been a really good thing. in these past few months. And I think, you know, if you know me, you'll know that I'm kind of well, there's a bright side to this about almost any topic. And the last few months haven't been easy for anybody. It's you know, we've got so many things we're not supposed to do. We can't do, we can't visit, we can't travel, we can't go to restaurants, blah, blah, blah. We can't even go to church and worship in the ways we're used to. But it's amazing how quickly people figured out, but we can do it in other ways, and they're good too. And it doesn't mean they don't yearn to go back and be together and so on, but it is important to try different things. And I think there'll be some things from this experience that we'll want to keep. And some of them will be, why are we crazy driving here and there everywhere, when in fact we can connect in other ways?
Yeah.
How can we reach out to people that maybe can't get out to church on Sunday anyway? All those kinds of things. And I've been amazed, you know, we know there are lots of limitations with technology, but for example, one of the groups in the church that's really enjoyed getting together for Zoom meetings is the National Indigenous Elders Council. Many of them are sort of home alone, so they've figured out the technology because they wanted to be able to connect, and that human drive for connection, both with God but also with one another, is fundamental to who we are. And today we have tools that let us do it in all kinds of ways. And so I just hope that we can, you know, we have huge opportunities. I hope we can embrace them in a way that lets us care for the earth, care for one another, and be willing to be changed by the experiences that we have and the world that we're living in. So that's just kind of my opener, and maybe people have questions or
Yeah,
comments.
there are some questions here. Barry Morris, this is a bit of a long question. I wonder if maybe Barry, you'd like to just hop on, unmute yourself, and summarize for us what it is that you're asking here.
Sure. Well, Nora, in your position, and especially with hindsight as our General Secretary, on the one hand, you may or may not have heard of the Iron Law of Oligarchy, whereby one person or a committee that has access to the decision-making for a church, an institution, by virtue of the information that they gather and garner, and have to make sometimes timely decisions, decisive decisions, sometimes quick decisions. But on the other hand, we pride ourselves perhaps on democratic processes and principles. I'm thinking, for example, of whether or not the church and to what extent can act quickly when there is a crisis and yet represent the larger body, the larger United Church, assuming that is that it can penetrate to the grassroots or vice versa. So that's kind of my comment and a question out of that, if I may ask.
Yeah, great question. And, you know, we could probably go on for a long thing on that. And, you know, first of all, let me just say that when I first came to work in this position, I'd worked for a number of years in government in the Northwest Territories in Nunavut and Saskatchewan, and I'd never heard so much discussion about power as I did when I came to work in the church. And it still amazes me because, like, don't we think there's somebody greater than us that has the power? But no, we're fixated on it. We're not great at making quick decisions. And one of the things in that comprehensive review process was that one of my comments to them was to say there have to be a way to get decisions made, because I think some of the challenges we got into for years is because we don't want to decide something that would make anybody feel bad, and that's almost anything, because, you know, we're going to have fewer resources, so we have to make choices and all that kind of stuff. So we have to have decisions. On the other hand, we are a really democratic church, and it's so darn frustrating, but it's also a good thing. And I think the processes that we have now are a little bit simpler, so there aren't quite as many layers of democracy or whatever. I've sometimes said, you know, my job would be perfect if I could just be a bishop one day a year, and then stuff that, you know, needed to get decided could get done, and the rest of the time we could have all our nice discussions and come to consensus and stuff like that. But of course, you know, that kind of thing doesn't work. And so, you know, isn't it Churchill that's supposed to say, it was supposed to have said that democracy is a terrible thing. We just haven't thought of anything better. And I think that's kind of true of the United Church. And it is sometimes hard to explain to people that neither the moderator nor I can, just like change everything. But at the same time, there's something powerful about, having on big questions, having to go to every congregation and have them grapple with it.
Yeah.
And my favorite time was when we did the statements of faith, and people wrote in saying, thank you for asking us to look at our statements of faith. So we had to talk about what we believed.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Maybe on your last day, you will get to be that bishop then.
Maybe. My last day is Halloween, so maybe you're giving me an idea for a
That'll be your
costume. I guess
send-off.
it's the Saturday, but it's, Halloween's a Saturday. My last day is the Friday, but
You could
close
even wear a
enough, right?
costume. It'd be great.
Yeah.
Alan Hux has a question for you. Go ahead, Alan.
Thank you. I'm delighted to see that you're in Elgin County. I grew up in Elgin County.
Whereabouts, Alan?
Down in Aldborough Township, near Rodney.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I grew up at Union, but there was somebody in the congregation I was in Toronto from Rodney too. So.
Now, Mike Milne did raise the question about Greta Vosper in the interviews, and I didn't quite follow the comments. I'm just a lay person, and I'm just wondering, in talking about decisions and a democratic approach, where did we end up in that whole discussion in the decision-making process from the national to the conference to what was then presbytery?
Yeah, so I'm just a layperson too, Alan, but so it's not so much about democracy as about the different, and in our structure at that time, the different courts of the church, each having separate powers, so separate responsibilities. So each level up doesn't oversee the other one in all that it does. So certain things they get to decide. And as you say, the decisions that affected her would normally have been presbytery decisions, but because Toronto Conference was in a experimental thing at that time, where the conference had taken over certain responsibilities of the presbyteries, it was sort of one of the moves to try out different things that might lead to the kind of changes we have now. So then I had to rule that because there was no, because the presbytery in that case didn't have that responsibility, conference had exercised it. So if there was going to be appeal, it had to be to a panel created through the general council process. So that was my only part in it, and otherwise it was a decision of the, so then it was the decision of the conference to when they chose to settle the matter. And I actually was not part of that or briefed on the details of it. So.
One thing we didn't know when we conducted the interview is who the new general secretary would be, and of course now we do. It's Michael Blair. Why is he the right person to lead the administrative part of the church going forward? What strengths does he bring, and what do you think his challenges will be right from day one, from the get-go?
Number one challenge, it's a big job and people expect so much, and no one person does it all, but he brings so much to it, and knowing that he was chosen gave me just so much reassurance that I can leave without feeling guilty, basically. He's been part of the senior leadership group, so I know him well. He's familiar with the issues. He's respected by his colleagues. He's a man of deep faith. He is often the one at the table pointing us to the bigger picture, and at the same time has shown that capacity to, in his own unit, which is the group that covers all global work and community ministries and a whole range of mostly the things that people think of as what the church does. He's brought change to how they function. As we've had to make changes in the church and be tougher about resources and so on, he's proven the capacity to make difficult decisions as well. One of his challenges will be he's so respected all over the world that he's already, even before stepping into this role, had many invitations to be part of working groups and give speeches and stuff, and he's going to have to pick and choose with that. And I think he also, people will expect him, oh, good, now we have a Black man, he'll solve the racism issue. Well, no, that's not so. These are complex issues, and those are issues we all have to work on. But I think he will be helpful to people, and you know, there's a lot of really good work going on in that area, and it won't be all Michael's to do. That'll be for all of us.
Okay. Well, I see that it's 7:58, so I'm going to wrap up the program. Thank you so much to all of you for being here tonight, especially to Mike and Josiah and Nora, who volunteered their time to make this event possible. We're so grateful to you. Tomorrow we'll be sending all the participants, yes, good claps, I see some claps. Tomorrow we'll be sending a short survey to you by email so you can share your thoughts with us about this event. As you know, Broadview Online Reading Clubs are a free event and the costs to produce it are minimal. However, if you would like to help Broadview continue to hire wonderful writers and journalists like Mike Alexander, Josiah Neufeld, and Mike Milne, who interviewed Nora, please consider making a small donation of $5 or $10 to our Friends Fund. Sharon will put up a link to the Friends Fund now if you'd like to use that, or it will also be attached to the survey that you'll receive in the email tomorrow. Broadview reading clubs exist across Canada, and if you're interested in joining a local club, and many of them are continuing to meet online, or in starting one of your own, you should check out our information pages at broadview.org/reading clubs. We'll also post that link. If your club isn't already listed on this list, let us know because we'd love to help you spread the word about your club. Following tonight's event, I invite those who are interested to remain on this Zoom call, and we'll just continue with an informal discussion, kind of like a coffee hour. I'm not going to lead it, but I will be here to chat if anybody wants to do that. Otherwise, thank you again for being here. Be well, and I hope to see you at our next reading club, which is November 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern, and that's when we'll be discussing the November issue. So stay tuned for new details as they come up in your e-newsletter. Thank you very much, and we'll say goodnight to those who want to go, and I'm still here for those who want to stick around and chat for a bit.
Night.
Good night. So Nora, this is my informal question for you. I really would like to know how you like the illustration.
Oh yeah, I was going to actually comment.
Or
my only hang up with it is then when people really see me, they'll go, I thought she was more glamorous than that, because they've seen that picture. So I've had a lot of people in my family were quite impressed. Oh, yeah. when did you get that painting done of you?
Yeah, yeah, good. Well, I'm glad if we're going to err on the side of glamorous or not glamorous, I think we chose the right way. So.
And my son and his girlfriend, the three of us are living here together, and she said, oh, I never knew Nora had blue eyes. So this is our joke now, that like we sit across from each other at the dinner table every night. Yeah. And anyway.
Oh, what color are your eyes? I can't tell.
They're blue. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
they're blue.
There you go.
Yeah, they're probably not as blue as that picture, just as I'm not as glamorous as that picture, but anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just curious to know what other stories in the magazine people were interested in from this issue, in the October issue. Does anybody have a favorite? What really grabbed you outside of the ones that we discussed tonight?
I should have
the
brought it
Raising
upstairs
Boys.
with me. Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
the
go ahead.
Raising Boys one was very interesting for me.
Yeah.
As a grandmother of a 6-year-old, I think a lot about that, and I found that one really interesting. Mm-hmm. But you know, I like them all, and I especially like the one that Josiah did of the architect who did her straw house, and it was an interesting journey. I'd like to have known more about her. The article was as long as I'm sure you could do it, but it raised more questions about what's next for her and where. They're all good. I read it cover to cover, like several times.
Great, Marie.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cheryl Bradby, who I spoke to for that column, she sold her house, but she's planning to, you asked what was next for her. I think when I spoke to her, she was planning to do another construction somewhat similar, maybe get a group of people together and build something, some communal living situation, maybe out in the country somewhere. And of course, she's teaching her classes at the, she teaches classes at Humber and Ryerson. I can't remember now what the two were, but in fact, the article that was published in Broadview was circulating amongst people at her university who have the power to allow her to keep teaching those classes or not. So she was excited about that.
I had a funny experience because a very good friend of mine, she read the article and then she said, she sent me an email and she said, I used to live in that house, because I guess Cheryl Bradby went on a sabbatical year or something of that nature. And so my friend rented her house almost probably a decade ago or more, but she's like, I can't believe it. That's my old house.
Love
Oh,
the
wow.
small world stuff. Eh?
Yeah, I know. I couldn't believe it. So, yeah. So Josiah, your book, you're shopping out around the idea. Do you have, will it kind of jump off also from the piece you did in the Walrus? Because that was also in the same vein.
Yeah, I'm building on that research that I did for that that article. I've sort of divided it into chapters focusing on different themes or different groups or different angles in my proposal. So, but yes, definitely building off of that Walrus article about Christianity and climate change.
Great. Well, keep us posted on that and be interested. I'm sure there'd be lots of our readers would be interested to hear more about that as it develops, or when it's, maybe we'll be able to review it when it's out.
For sure. Yeah, I'll definitely keep you posted. I may even pitch a chapter or two here and there as a standalone article at some point along the way.
Yeah. Oh, good idea. Yeah. So Mike, are you still doing your triathlete work? Still biking, staying in shape?
Yeah, I got this this thing they call a smart trainer. So it kind of has resistance sort of built into this indoor cycling machine. So I just sort of tie my bike up to that and I do crazy, I'm doing sort of routes in Italy and Switzerland that are virtual, but duplicate the actual sort of gradients and conditions of these rides that professionals do.
Amazing.
And it is brutal work, but it's really cool to sort of get a feeling of like what people are doing when they're on the Tour de Suisse or the Giro d'Italia or, you know, the Tour de France. Like you really get a taste for what it's like to do that kind of riding. And,
Up those long hills and everything. Yeah.
oh, it's started doing like 14%, 15% gradient kind of things that just, like I did a big ride yesterday and slept for an additional 3 hours today. I think it's so rewarding to be able to kind of just really plow through something like that. But it's also good to know that, like, okay, the body's just not going to give me an option here. We're going to recover from that effort nicely. And I don't know, something about training inside is all winter long, and I'm really stoked about it.
So Mike, we're in the
no
same
basement.
boat because I'm an outdoor runner as year round as much as I can, but I'm looking ahead to when it's icy. So if I flip the camera around right now, you'd see I spent the weekend assembling a new Max Trainer thing. So I have something to do inside. Yeah, I thought about those ones that show you that you can do a run, you know, somewhere else in the world. But anyway, this fits better into my house. And but you got to have something to, and I think especially in these COVID times, for me at least, the daily activity has been like one of the constants and it always grounds me and all that kind of thing. I mean, this time of year is the best outside. It's so fantastic, but I know there'll be days. In fact, there are more days down here that you can't run in the winter than up north, because up north it's not slippery. It's just really cold. You can layer for that, but the slipperiness is anyway, or maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know, but whatever.
Yeah, I'm gonna try. Have you done a lot of outside like winter running?
Yeah, I lived in Northwest Territories in Nunavut for about 20 years, so and I ran year round. Yeah, I mean, not if it's a blizzard, but in the cold, you just put multiple layers over your mouth and you don't go very fast.
We got these sort of things, galoshes type things that have spikes on them that you can put over your shoes. Any thoughts on how those work?
I haven't tried those. I've got little studs that I screwed into my old running shoes, and I use those on the icy days. And anyway, probably the rest of us don't want to hear that, but it's great to find a kindred spirit, and yeah, it's good.
Awesome, great.
Yeah.
You guys make me feel lazy, but that's okay.
It's not, people think it's like some heroic thing. No, it feeds me. It feeds my soul.
Yeah.
And in these days to get out and you see the lakes different every day, or the trees are different every day, and yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
sorry, folks.
That's okay.
About the discipline of being able to do something on a regular basis. I think it just sort of keeps my mind a little bit sharper than it might be if I was feeling listless or something like that. Like, I just find like I gotta do something and do it often and do it repetitively and establish these patterns kind of thing.
It's just a pattern. Yeah. And here our crazy puppy just arrived, and anyway, hello Freddie.
How about you, Josiah? Do you have exercise goals in mind for the fall?
Oh, I still keep running even when it's cold. I haven't been running as much recently, strangely, as I usually do, but I try to get into the habit of it when the weather's in the fall time, because if I've got momentum, then I can ease into the winter. But if I let a gap happen, then I won't.
And you feel so noble and Canadian by getting out in the winter, right? So
yeah.
I'd like to talk about another article in the issue.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, go ahead, Alan. Jump on in.
I'm just going to duck out because I have to go finish putting supper on the table for my kids. So
great to see you, Josiah. Thanks so much for coming out tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been nice talking to you all. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Yeah, I thought the Rethinking the Police was a very good set of interviews, and it's such an important topic right now, particularly in the major cities, where Black Lives Matter is an important issue, and Indigenous lives, and so I thought that was really interesting, and I thought Ellen Babineau was a very interesting individual.
Yeah, we that all kind of came up. We had a completely different plan for the section, and it all came up, and we had to scrap our editorial plans. And interviews are kind of tend to be a quick way to put together some very thoughtful editorial, as opposed to assigning a major feature to a writer, which takes a lot of one person's time and hard to get it done quickly, especially to do it really well. So we decided to go with the interview package idea, and there were a few other people that we had tried to get, but the way it turned out, I thought was really great. We wanted to balance Black lives and Indigenous lives, and we were able to do that. And we wanted to have some perspective from within the police, as well as from people who have experienced the police in other ways, usually not so great. So I felt that, what can you do with you have three different people, try to get the balance into the mix, and I felt pretty good about it. So I'm glad you thought that it worked.
Yeah, and I was interested in Babineau speaking about de-escalation training, and it would be interesting to hear a little more about that in a kind of a follow-up way.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm forgetting her name, but there's a suggestion from the second person. Sorry, remind myself of her name. Alexander, that that the police don't do de-escalation, but you know, I think they do a lot, but not obviously every time, and often things escalate too quickly and get out of control. I mean, we see both things, but you know, there certainly are lots of instances where a situation is de-escalated satisfactorily.
I've met some emergency service vehicle drivers and who respond to emergency calls, and they said that in Toronto, they have specific instructions. If violence starts, they are directly required to call the police and to back off. That they're not trained, you know, as emergency service staff who are there to try and provide medical assistance at the site to deal with violence. So they automatically call the police. And so I think a lot of us didn't realize that, and we just assumed that, oh, you know, it's a 911 call and they just barge in.
Mm.
But it's a complicated area.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, everybody. I think supper is made. I can smell something downstairs. So we're having a late supper tonight, but I think it's ready. So I'm going to head down. And thanks, everybody. Great to be here. And thanks for asking me, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much for being here. Take care, Nora.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, the police one was really interesting for me. You know, obviously there's a lot of work to be done there, and you know, the critiques of the police are, you know, resonating for sure with me, with many people. I also come from, you know, my husband's a police officer, and you know, and so we've had some very interesting discussions, different perspectives and so on, and you know, he's got some great perspective on what's changed over time and how much has changed in his time as a police officer that goes back to the early 90s, and you know, how the efforts to diversify the police service itself have really made a difference in the tone of conversation among police and so on. But you know, there's an awful lot more work to do there, and yeah, so anyway, I was glad to be able to bring the issues forward in the magazine for more discussion. Any other thoughts on that, Alan, or?
No, I just think it's an ongoing issue, and you know, something that is a real question, you know. And
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mike, you've written a bit about it as well.
Yeah, and it's I have an uncle that was I guess a homicide detective when he retired for the Victoria Police Department, and I remember, like, in the 90s, long time ago now, I guess, he sent me a video, a VHS tape of this CBC story, I think it was, about a bunch of VPD officers who attended a sweat lodge somewhere on the island. And he thought it was important that I see that. And I can't seem to forget about that. You know, that didn't seem like a pretty small thing for him to send me. Like, and I feel like, you know, individually, I've met some pretty amazing people who sort of feel this desire to protect and serve, or whatever they want to call it. And I mean, on a fundamental level, I sort of feel like, yeah, their job is to respond. It's not to prevent. So I think that there's a lot of, I mean, when I think of the the things that need to change, I think sort of think about, well, how do we prevent things from occurring in the first place? It doesn't make sense to sort of come after the fact and start roughing people up, or you know, whatever it is that people do in a heightened sort of emotional, traumatic potentially situation. How do we prevent things from escalating to that point? And you know, I've learned a few de-escalation techniques over the years when I was training as a mediator. And you know, there's some communication stuff that makes a lot of sense, I think, as far as interpersonal communication is concerned, that I don't seem to have very many positive experiences in my dealings with the police. But I think that if these sort of communication skills were utilized, you know, I would feel a little bit safer. But I know that, you know, my uncle's a good guy, you know, that he's one of these folks that I think about that is doing the best that he could throughout his career to keep everyone sort of in mind. And, you know, maybe I'm biased, but I mean, I'm also pretty biased that, you know, I don't feel safe in the presence of the police most of the time. So it's, I'm pulled in multiple ways. I think it's systemic issues tend to be like that. They're hard to navigate and hard to envision what the best solution looks like. But they say that, you know, community policing is an interesting way to go. So what looks good to me here in Kamloops might look totally different to, you know, something in Toronto or what have you. Hard to sort of prescribe my solutions to folks living in a city 4 or 5 times the size of mine, for sure.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, we're down to a pretty small group, so I'm going to thank everybody for coming and sticking around until 8:20. That's great. Mike, we'll talk to you soon. You've got more articles coming up that are great, and I'm looking forward to reading them, so keep it going. And we'll think of you when topics come up that we think you'd be interested in, so that's great.
That's awesome.
And thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Jocelyn.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.